We are moving along to Saxon Lesson 12, talking about decimal numbers today. You have two objectives, one of which is to compare and order decimal numbers, and the other is to convert between fractions, decimals, and your fun fact of the day is that apples are more efficient than caffeine in keeping people awake in the morning. So if you're anything like Mr. Ayers and drink coffee all the time, I guess supposedly it'd be better to just eat an apple, keep you awake. And it also means no more Monster energy drinks. So let's get moving on to the examples. Example 1 says, name each decimal number, then write the decimal number as a reduced fraction. Okay, well, name each decimal number means to actually write it like you should read it. Okay, so letter A, we see a 2.8. Okay, well, when we read decimals, it's 2. When we see the decimal point, we say and. So it's 2 and 8, and one spot after the decimal is the tenths. Okay, so this is 2 and 8/10 in words. Okay, so that's one answer right there. And the other thing says to write it as a reduced fraction. Well, I can write it as a mixed number just like I read it. 2 and 8/10. That's the nice thing about reading decimals out loud. 2 and 8/10. Only thing is I see the 8/10 is not reduced. And I know that if I reduce that, that's 2 and 4/5. Okay, so in words, this decimal is 2 and 8/10. As a reduced fraction, it's 2 and 4/5 because we reduced the 8/10 down to 4/5. All right, and part B. Okay, well, we read this 0 and then this is 75, and 2 placed after the decimal is hundredths. Okay, now when I have 0 and, I don't really need to say that, so I can just read this as 75 hundredths. And that's got a THS on the end. Okay, so it's 75 hundredths. Well, again, nice thing about reading them as decimals is I can just write that as a fraction like it sounds. It's 75 hundredths. That's 75 over 100. Now I have to write it as a reduced fraction. So 75 hundredths reduced is 3/4. Okay, now some of you may have known that 0.75 is 3/4 in your head. That's great. Okay, so if you know that, go ahead and just write that as a reduced fraction. Just make sure your fraction parts are reduced. Let's go ahead and move on to the next example. Example 2 says to express each fraction or mixed number as a decimal number. Okay, well, we express fractions as decimals by dividing. Okay, we're going to write a division problem, and we always put the top number on the inside. Okay, so I'm going to write a little note up here about that. When we set this up, we put the top inside and the bottom outside. Okay, so top divided by the bottom looks like this. So in this one, 3 goes on the inside, 8 goes on the outside. Well, 8 does not go into 3, so that's a 0. When we divide with decimals, we got to put a point and add another 0. Bring that decimal point on up. Okay, remember we worked on these earlier in the year. Now, 8 goes into 30 3 times. 3 times 8 is 24. I subtract. I get 6. With decimals, I can't have a remainder, so I got to keep going. I got to bring down a 0. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. So that's 4 when I subtract. And again, I got to keep going. Bring down a 0. And 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. I have no remainder. So here's my answer. 0.375 for 3/8. Okay, well now, the next one, 2.5. The first thing I have to do before I can divide this is write 2.5 as a fraction. It's currently a mixed number. Okay, so I have to write it as a fraction. Well, I know that 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, so 2.5 is equal to 5 halves. So now I can go ahead and divide it. I put the top on the inside, the bottom on the outside. 2 goes into 5 2 times. Leaves me a remainder of 1. Again, I have to add a decimal point and a 0, so that I have something to bring down here. And 2 goes into 10 5 times. I have no remainder, so there's my answer. 2.5 as a decimal number is 2.5, which a lot of you would have known without doing any work, but I want to show you how you would do the work for a problem like this if you needed to. Again, so you convert the mixed number to a fraction, then go ahead and divide top divided by bottom. Okay, on example 3 it says to convert each number to a percent, and I crossed out the by multiplying each number by 100. Here's what we're going to do to convert 2 tenths into a percentage. Oops, sorry. Okay, all we do to convert a decimal into a percent is move the decimal to the right twice. So I go 1, 2, okay, which would put the decimal at the end of the number. I had to fill in this with a 0. Okay, so that's going to be 20%. Okay, when I move that decimal over to the right twice, it's kind of like putting a percent sign right after that there. Okay, so A is 20%. Let's do B. I get 0.125. Again, convert decimal to percent. I move the decimal over 2 times and drop my decimal right in there. So it's 12.5, and then I put a percent at the end. And for letter C, I got 1.5. Again, I move the decimal over twice. 1, 2, I fill in a 0. I write all 3 of those digits this time, since there's a 1 in front, and I put the percent sign, 150%. Alright, so when we go from decimal to percent, we move the decimal to the right. Okay? And when we want to go the other way, we want to go percent to decimal, we move it to the left. From percent to decimal. Okay? So in letter A, notice I've got 5%. I want to convert it to decimal, so I've got to first put a decimal point in here, and I move it to the left twice. See, because I'm going from percent to decimal, so I move it to the left twice. So I count 1, 2, that means the decimal goes out here in front, and I put a 0, and that new number is 0.05. And since I'm writing it as a decimal, I do not include the percent sign this time. Alright, and in B, we go 225%. Again, there would be a decimal right here. I move it to the left twice, so it's 2.25. There. Okay, so from decimal to percent, we move the decimal to the right twice, and from percent to decimal, we move to the left twice. Alright, on example 4, we want to arrange an order from least to greatest. Well, this problem is different than the other ones we've done because I've got a fraction and a percentage and 2 decimals. So the first thing I should do is convert them all to the same form. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite each one. Here's 1/2, here's 12%, here's 1.2, 0.2, and negative 1.2. Well, 2 of them are already decimals, and typically when we involve decimals and percents and fractions, the easiest form to go to is decimals. Okay, so I'm going to convert each one of these into a decimal. Well, 1/2 I know as a decimal is 0.5. 12% as a decimal is 0.12. Again, because we would move that decimal over to the left twice on that one. 1.2 is already a decimal, so I'm just going to leave it. And negative 1.2 is already a decimal, so I'm just going to leave it. Okay, now I'm going to look at those decimals and compare them. Well, I only see one negative number here, so I know that's the lowest, negative 1.2. The rest of them are all positive. So here's how it would help to compare decimals if you're not sure exactly what to do. You take them and line them all up in a vertical line by their decimal points. So I'm going to write 0.5. Okay, next one is 0.12, and the decimal part has to line up with this one. So I'm going to write it like 0.12. And it's got an extra digit out here, which is okay. I could fill in a 0 here if I needed to while I'm comparing. Okay, 1.2 just goes right here, 1.2. Now I'm going to look at those numbers and compare them from the left. Well, I see 2 zeros and a 1, so I automatically know one of these two is the next lowest. Then I go over again. Okay, and I compare 1 to 5. 1 is lower than 5, so this number is less. Even though it's got more digits, it doesn't matter. Okay, it's all about place value. So we go from the left to the right, and I see this number is lower than that one. So that means 0.12 is next. Okay, well, using the same logic here, 0 compared to 1, I know 0 is less, so that means 0.5 is the next one, which means 1.2 has to be last. Now I cannot leave my list in this order, okay, or looking like this. I have to write the numbers like they look to start with. So I'm looking at negative 1.2, going to my original list, it looked like negative 1.2, so I'm going to leave that one alone. But when I look at 0.12, that started off as 12%, which means I need to write it in its original form now, 12%. So notice how I kept my work nice and organized so that this part is easy and I don't have to think too much about it. Okay, 0.5, when I look at that, that started as 1/2. So I'm going to write 1/2 next, and then 1.2. Now again, some of you may be good at just knowing what order these go in. So if you just know it in your head, that's okay. I'm just giving you a method to use, okay, if you're not exactly sure what order those numbers should go in. Convert them to decimals, then put them in order, and then rewrite them in the order that they should go in. Okay? And we're on to the last example here. Example 5. I'm skipping part A. We're going to do part B and part C. Part B says how much money is 75% of 40? Well, again, this just means 75% of means times 40. You can do this any number of ways, okay? But I need to convert 75% into either a decimal or a fraction to be able to multiply it by this. Okay, so that's my first step. I'm going to convert it into a fraction just because I like working with fractions better. So that's 3/4 times 40. And I know I can put that over 1. I can cross reduce. 3 times 10 is 30. Okay? And on the bottom I got 1 times 1, so that's just 1. And it says how much money is 75% of $40? So that means I should have $30. Now you could have easily made this 0.75 and multiplied it by 40 and gotten the same answer. Alright, letter C. Letter C says estimate 8.25% sales tax on a 1995 purchase. Sales tax works the same way. You take the percent and you multiply it by the cost. So I'm going to take 8.25% times $19.95. And since it says estimate, I'm allowed to round. So I'm going to round this to about 8%. I'm going to round $19.95 to about $20. Okay? Well, now again, you can multiply it however you want. You can use fractions, okay? You can use decimals, it doesn't matter. I know that 8% is 8 over 100, so I'm going to write it that way. So I'm going to take 8 over 100 times 20 over 1. Well, I know that this reduces and that reduces to 5. Okay, so 8 times 1 on top is 8, 5 times 1 on bottom is 5, and now I need to convert this into money. Okay, so that means I need to make it into a decimal. So I'm going to go ahead and take 8 divided by 5 to make it a decimal. That goes in there once, and I'm going to add a 0 in a second here. I'm going to multiply that out and get 5 and 30, and bring down a 0, and that's 1.6. Okay, and in money terms, 1.6 doesn't make sense, so it's $1.60. So it's about $1.60 is what I would have to pay for sales tax on that. In sales tax, you just multiply the percentage times the cost of the item to figure out the sales tax. That is it. Alright, and that is your entire lesson for lesson 12. So if you have any questions, make sure you ask. Otherwise, good luck and happy homeworking.